Zooey Mama. Welcome back, young fellows. It's me, Greg Heffley, also known as Sleepless Tales, reading you Heart of Darkness, my favorite book I've ever read. In fact, I've read it 100 times now. Anyways, we're starting on... My arm hurts. We're starting on part 3. And by starting, I mean that we're continuing on part 3. This is page 90 of my copy. I don't have too much to say. I hope you've been enjoying the story so far, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and to Sleepless Tales. Yep, YouTube. Anyways, let's get started on part 3. I looked at him, lost in astonishment. There he was before me, in motley, as though he had been ensconced in a troupe of mimes, enthusiastic and fabulous. His very existence was improbable, inexplicable, and altogether bewildering. He was an insoluble problem. It was inconceivable how he had existed, how he had succeeded in getting so far, how he had managed to remain, why he had not instantly disappear. I went a little farther, he said, then still a little farther, till I had gone so far that I didn't know I'll ever get back. Never mind, plenty time, I can imagine. You take Kurtz away. Quick, I tell you. The glamour of youth enveloped his party-colored rags, his destitution, his loneliness, the essential desolation of his futile wanderings. For months, for years, his life hadn't been worth a day's purchase. And yet, he was gallantly, thoughtlessly alive, to all appearances indestructible, solely by the virtue of his few years and his unreflecting audacity. I was seduced into something like admiration, like envy. Glamour urged him on. Glamour kept him unscathed. He surely wanted nothing from the wilderness but space to breathe in and to push on through. His need was to exist, and to move on towards the greatest possible risk, and with the maximum privation. If the absolutely pure, uncalculating, unpractical spirit of adventure had ever ruled a human being, it ruled this bespatched youth. I almost envied him the possession of the modest and clear flame. It seemed to have consumed all thought of self so completely that even while he was talking to you, you forgot that it was he, the man before your eyes, that had gone through these things. I did not envy him his devotion to Kurtz, though he had not mediated it over him. It came to him, and he accepted it with a sort of eager fatalism. I must say that to me it appeared about the most dangerous thing in every way he had come upon so far. They had come together unavoidably, like two ships becalmed near each other, and lay rubbing sides at last. I suppose Kurtz wanted an audience, because on a certain occasion, when encamped in the forest, they all talked all night, or more probably, Kurtz had talked. We talked of everything, he said, quite transported at the recollection. I forget there was such a thing as sleep. The night did not seem to last an hour. Everything. Of love, too. Ah, he talked to you of love. I said, much amused, "It isn't what you think," he cried, almost passionately. It was in general. He made me see things. Things. He threw his arms up. We were on deck at the time, and a headsman of my woodcutters, lounging nearby, turned upon him, his heavy, glittering eyes. I looked around. I don't know why, but I assure you that never before did this land, this river, and this jungle, the very arch of this blazing sky, appear to me so hopeless and so dark, so impenetrable to human thought, so pitiless to human weakness, and ever since, you've been with him, of course, I said. On the contrary, it appears our intercourse has been very much broken by various causes. He had, as he informed me proudly, managed to nurse Kurtz through 2 illnesses. He alluded it to you as if it were some kind of risky feat, but as a rule, Kurtz wandered alone, far in the depths of the forest, very often coming to the station. I had to wait days and days before he would turn up, he said. Ah, it was worth waiting for. Sometimes. What was he doing? Exploring or what? I asked. Oh, yes, of course. He had discovered lots of villages. A lake, too. He did not know exactly in what direction. It was dangerous to inquire too much, but mostly his expeditions had been for ivory. But he had no goods to trade with at that time, I objected. There's a good lot of cartridges left even yet, he answered, looking away. To speak plainly, he raided the country, I said. He nodded. Not alone, surely. He muttered something about the villages round that lake. Kurtz got the tribe to follow him. Did he? I suggested. He fidgeted a little. They adored him, he said. The tone of these words were so extraordinary that I looked at him searchingly. It was curious to see his mingled eagerness and reluctance to speak of Kurtz. The man filled his life, and occupied his thoughts, and swayed his emotions. "What can you expect?" he burst out. He came to them with thunder and lightning, and they had never seen anything like it. Very terrible. He could be very terrible. You can't judge Mr. Kurtz as you would an ordinary man. No. Now, just to give you an idea, I don't mind telling you, he wanted to shoot me too, once. And one day. But I don't judge him. "Shoot you?" I cried. "What for?" "Well, I had a small lot of ivory the chief of that village near my house gave me. You see, I used to shoot game for them. Well, he wanted it, and wouldn't hear any reason. He declared he'd shoot me unless I gave him the ivory, and then cleared out of the country, because he could do so, and had a fancy for it. There was nothing on earth to prevent him from killing whom he jolly well pleased. And it was true, too. I gave him the ivory. What did I care? But I didn't clear out. Oh no, I couldn't leave him. I had to be careful, of course, till we got friendly again for a time. I had a second illness then. Afterwards, I had to keep out of the way. But I don't mind. He was living for the most part in those villages on the lake. When he came down the river, sometimes he would take me, and sometimes it was better for me to be careful. This man suffered too much. He hated all this, and somehow he couldn't get away. When I had the chance, I begged him to try and leave while there was still time. I offered to go back with him, and he would say yes, but then he would remain, go off on another ivory hunt, disappear for weeks, forget himself amongst these people. Forget himself, Why, he's mad, I said. He protested indignantly. Mr. Kurtz couldn't be mad. If I'd heard him talk, only 2 days ago, I wouldn't dare hint at such a thing. I had taken up my binoculars while we talked, and was looking at the shore, sweeping the limit of the forest at each side and at the back of the house. The consciousness of there being people in that bush, so quiet, so silent, as silent and quiet as the ruined house on the hill, made me uneasy. There was no sign on the face of nature of this amazing tale. There was not so much as told as suggested to me in desolate exclamations, completed by shrugs and interrupted phrases, and hints ending in deep sighs. The woods were unmoved, like a mask, heavy, like the closed door of a prison. They looked with the air of hidden knowledge, of patient expectation, of unapproachable silence. The Russian was explaining to me that it was only lately that Mr. Kurtz had come down to the river, bringing along with him all the fighting men of that lake tribe. He had been absent for several months, getting himself adored, I suppose, and had come down unexpectedly, with the intention, to all appearance, of making a raid or either across the river or down the stream. Evidently, the appetite for more ivory had got the better of the, what shall I say, less material aspirations. However, he had got much worse suddenly. I heard he was lying helpless, and so I came up and took my chance, said the Russian. Oh, he's bad, very bad. I directed my glass to the house. There were no signs of life. There was a ruined roof, the long mud wall peeping above the grass with 3 little square window holes, not 2 of the same size. All was brought within reach of my hand, as it were, and then I made a brusque movement, and one of the remaining pots of that vanished fence leaped up in the field of my glass. You remember, I told you, I had been struck at the distance by certain attempts at ornamentation, rather remarkable in the ruinous aspect of this place. Now I had suddenly a nearer view, and its first result was to make me throw my head back as if before a blow. Then I went carefully from post to post with my glass, and saw my mistake. These round knobs were not ornamental but symbolic. They were expressive and puzzling, and striking and disturbing. Food for thought, and also for vultures, if there had been any looking down from the sky. But at all events for such ants as were industrious enough to ascend the pole. They'd have been made more impressive, those heads on stakes, if their faces had not been turned to the house. The only one, the first I had made out, was facing my way. I was not so shocked as you may think. The start back I had given was really nothing but a movement of surprise. I had expected to see a knob of wood there, I returned deliberately to the first I had seen, and there it was, black, dried, sunken, with closed eyelids, a head that seemed asleep at the top of that pole, and with the shrunken dry lips, showing a narrow white line of teeth, and smiling too. Smiling continuously at some endless and jocose dream of that eternal slumber. I'm not disclosing any trade secrets. In fact, the manager said afterwards that Mr. Kurt's methods had ruined the district. I have no opinion on that point, but I want you to clearly understand that there was nothing exactly profitable in these heads being there. They only showed that Mr. Kurtz lacked restraint in the gratifications of his various lusts, that there was something wanting in him, some small matter which, when the pressing need arose, could not be found under his magnificent eloquence. Whether he knew of this deficiency himself, I can't say. I think the knowledge came to him at last, only at the very last, but the wilderness had found him out early, and had taken on him a terrible vengeance for the fantastic invasion. I think it had whispered to him things about himself which he did not know, things of which he had no conception till he took counsel with his great solitude, and the whisper had proved irresistibly fascinating. It echoed loudly within him, because he was hollow at the core. I put down the glass, and the head that had appeared near enough to be spoken to seemed at once to have leaped away from me, in accessible distance. The admirer of Mr. Kurtz was a bit crestfallen. In a hurried, indistinct voice, he began to assure me that he had not dared to take these, symbols down. He was not afraid of the natives. They would not stir till Mr. Kurtz gave the word. His ascendancy was extraordinary. The camps of these people surrounded the place, and the chiefs came every day to see him. They would crawl. I don't want to know anything of the ceremonies used when approaching Mr. Kurtz, I shouted. Curious, this feeling came over me with such details that it would be intolerable to those heads drying on the stakes under Mr. Kurtz's windows. After all, I was only a savage sight, while I seemed at one bound to have been transported into some lightless region of subtle horrors, where pure, uncomplicated savagery was a positive relief, being something that had a right to exist, obviously, in the sunshine. The young man looked at me with surprise. I suppose it did not occur to him that Mr. Kurtz was no idol of mine. He forgot I hadn't heard of any of these splendid monologues on... What was it? On love? On justice? On conduct of life? Or whatnot? If it had come to crawling before Mr. Kurtz, he crawled as much as the veriest savage of them all. I had no idea of the conditions, he said. These heads were heads of rebels. I shocked him excessively by laughing. Rebels will be the next definition I was to hear. There had been enemies, criminals, workers, and these were rebels? These rebellious heads looked very subdued to me on their sticks. You don't know how such a life tries a man like Kurtz, cried Kurtz's last disciple. Well, and you? I said. I'm a simple man. I have no great thoughts. I want nothing from anybody. How can you compare me to... His feelings were too much for speech, and suddenly he broke down. I don't understand, he groaned. I've been doing my best to keep him alive, and that's enough. I have no hand in this. I have no abilities. There hasn't been a drop of medicine or a mouthful of invalid food for months here. He was shamefully abandoned, a man like this, with such ideas. Shamefully. I haven't slept for the last 10 nights. His voice lost itself in the calm of the evening. The long shadows of the forest had slipped downhill while we watched. Had gone by, beyond the ruined hovel, beyond the symbolic row of stakes. All this was in the gloom, while we down there were yet in the sunshine, and the stretch of the river abreast of the clearing glittered in a still and dazzling splendor. With a murky and overshadowed bend above and below, not a single soul was seen on the shore. The bushes did not rustle. Suddenly, round the corner of the house a group of men appeared, as though they had come up from the ground. They waded waist-deep in the grass in a compact body, bearing an improvised stretcher in their midst. Instantly, in the emptiness of the landscape, a cry arose whose shrillness pierced the air like a sharp arrow flying straight to the very heart of the land. And, as if by some enchantment, streams of human beings, of naked human beings with spears in their hands, with bows and with shields and with wild glances and savage movements, were poured into the clearing by the dark-faced and pensive forest. The bushes shook, the grass swayed for a time, and then everything stood still in the attentive immobility. Now, if he does not say the right thing to them, we are all done for, said the Russian at my elbow. The knot of men with the stretcher had stopped, too, halfway to the steamer, as if petrified. I saw the man on the stretcher sit up, lank and with an uplifted arm, above the shoulders of the bearers. Let us hope that the man who can talk so well of love in general will find some particular reason to spare us this time, I said, resented bitterly the absurd danger of our situation, as if to be at the mercy of that atrocious phantom had been a dishonoring necessity. I did not hear a sound, but through my glasses I saw the thin arm extending commandingly. The lower jaw was moving, the eyes of that apparition shining darkly far on its bony head that nodded with grotesque jerks. Kurtz? That means short in German, doesn't it? Well, the name was true as everything else in his life, and death. He looked at least 7 feet long. His covering had fallen off, and his body emerged from it pitiful and appalling as from a winding sheet. I could see the cage of his ribs all astir, the bones of his arm waving. It was as though an animated image of death, carved out of old ivory, had been shaking its hand, with menaces of motionless crowd of men made of dark and glittering bronze. I saw him open his mouth wide. It gave a weirdly voracious aspect, as though he'd wanted to swallow all the air, all the earth, and all the men before him. A deep voice reached me faintly. He must have been shouting. He fell back suddenly. The stretcher shook as the bearers staggered forth again, and almost at the same time I noticed that the crowd of savages was vanishing without any perceptible movement of retreat, as if the forest that had ejected these beings so suddenly had drawn them in again, as the breath is drawn in with a long aspiration. Some of the pilgrims behind the stretcher carried his arms, 2 shotguns, a heavy rifle, and a light revolver carbine, the thunderbolts of that pitiful Jupiter. The manager bent over him murmuring as he walked beside his head. They laid him down in one of the little cabins, just a room for a place bed and a camp stool or two, We had bought his belated correspondence, and a lot of torn envelopes and open letters littered his bed. His hand roamed feebly amongst these papers. I was struck by the fire of his eyes and the composed languor of his expression. It was not so much the exhaustion of disease. He did not seem in pain. The shadow looked satiated and calm, as though for the moment it had its fill of all the emotions. He rustled one of the letters, and looking straight in my face said, "I am glad. Somebody is writing to him about me." These special recommendations were turning up again. The volume of tone he emitted without effort, almost without the trouble of moving his lips, amazed me. A voice. It was grave, profound, vibrating. While the man did not seem capable of a whisper, however, he had enough strength in him, facetious no doubt, to nearly make an end of us, as you shall hear directly. The manager appeared silent in the doorway. I stepped out at once, and he drew the curtain after me. The Russian eyed curiously by the pilgrims was staring at the shore. I followed the direction of his glance. Dark human shapes could be made out in the distance, and flitting indistinctively against the gloomy border of the forest and near the river 2 bronze figures, leaning on tall spears, stood in the sunlight under fantastic headdresses of spotted skins, warlike and still in statuesque repose. And, from right to left, along the lighted shore, moved a wild and gorgeous apparition of a woman. She walked with measured steps, draped in striped and fringed cloths, and treading the earth proudly, and with a slight jingle and flash of barbarous ornaments, she carried her head high. Her hair was done in the shape of a helmet, and she had brass leggings to the knee, brass wire gauntlets to the elbow, a crimson spot on her tawny cheek, innumerable necklaces of glass beads on her neck, bizarre things, charms, gifts of witchmen that hung about her, glittered and trembled at every step. She must have had the value of several elephant tusks upon her. She was savage and superb, wild-eyed and magnificent. There was something ominous and stately in her deliberate progress, and, in the hush that had fallen suddenly upon the whole sorrowful land, the immense wilderness, and the colossal body of the fecund and mysterious life seemed to look at her, pensive, as though it had been looking at the image of its own tuberous and passionate soul. She came abreast of the steamer, and stood still, and faced us. Her long shadow fell on the water's edge. Her face had a tragic and fierce aspect of wild sorrow and of dumb pain, mingled with the fear of some struggling, half-shaped resolve. She stood looking at us without a stir, and like the wilderness itself, with an air of brooding over an inscrutable purpose. A whole minute passed, and then she made a step forward. There was a low jingle, a glint of yellow metal, a sway of fringed draperies, and she stopped, as if her heart had failed her. The young fellow by my side growled. The pilgrims murmured at my back. She looked at us all as if her life had depended upon the unswerving steadiness of her glance. Suddenly, she opened her barred arms and threw them up rigid above her head, as though in an uncontrollable desire to touch the sky. And at the same time, the swift shadow darted out on the earth and swept around on the river, gathering the steamer into a shadowy embrace. A formidable silence hung over the scene. She turned away slowly and walked on, and following the bank, and passed into the bushes to the left. Once only her eyes glared back at us in the dusk of the thickets before she disappeared. If she had offered to come aboard, I really think I would have tried to shoot her, said the man of patches, nervously. I've been risking my life every day for the last fortnight to keep her out of the house. She got in one day and kicked up a row about those miserable rags I picked up in the storeroom to mend my clothes with. I wasn't decent. At least it must have been that, for she talked like a fury to Kurtz for an hour, pointing at me now and then. I don't understand the dialect of this tribe. Luckily for me, I fancy Kurt felt ill that day to care, or there had been mischief. I don't understand. No, it's too much for me. Well, it's all over now. At this moment, I heard Kurt's deep voice behind the curtain. Save me. Save the ivory, you mean. Don't tell me. Save me. Why, I had to save you. You're interrupting my plans now. Sick. Not so sick as you would like to believe. Never mind. I'll carry my ideas out. I will return. I'll show you what can be done. You with your little peddling notions. You're interfering with me. I will return. The manager came out. He did the honor to take me under the arm and lead me aside. He is very low, he said. He considered it necessary to sigh, but neglected to be consistently sorrowful. We have done all we could for him, haven't we? There's no disguising the fact Mr. Kurtz has done more harm than good to the company. He did not see the time. He was not ripe for vigorous action. Cautiously, that's my principle. It must be cautious yet. The district is closed to us for a time. Deplorable. Upon the whole, the trade will suffer. I don't deny that there's a remarkable quantity of ivory, mostly fossil. We must save it, at all events. But look how precarious the position is. And why? Because the method is unsound. Do you, said I, looking at the shore, call it unsound method? Without doubt, he exclaimed hotly. Don't you? No method at all, I murmured after a while. Exactly, he exulted. I anticipated this. Shows a complete want of judgment. It's my duty to point out in the proper quarter. Oh, said I, that fellow, what's his name? The brickmaker, will make a readable report for you. He appeared confounded for a moment. It seemed to me that I had never breathed an atmosphere so vile, and I turned mentally to Kurtz for relief. Positively for relief. Nevertheless, I think Mr. Kurtz is a remarkable man, I said with emphasis. He started, dropping on me a heavy glance, said very quickly, He was, and turned his back on me. My hour of favor was over. I found myself lumped along with Kurtz as a partisan of methods for which the time was not ripe. I was unsound. But it was something I must have at least, choice of nightmares. And that's where I'm going to cut it off with part 3. It's part 1 of part 3. Be finishing this up soon. You're doing great, guys. Keep it up. I'm so proud of you. Almost done with Heart of Darkness. What a rowdy chapter. Who is this female? I think it's the first female. Yeah, it's female. Say it like a dweeb. It's the first girl in the entire story. What does she want? I don't even understand what Kurtz's methods are. I don't understand this book. It's too confusing. I've got a smooth little brain. We're children. Anyways, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next part. You have a great night. Okay, bye.